Hey everyone, I'm Doug Ballinger, and I'm Logan's dad. Today's episode is deeply personal, and it might be one of the hardest ones I've recorded, but also one of the most important. On May 19th, 2020, my son Logan died from a fatal dose of what he thought was heroin. But it wasn't just heroin, it was a chemical cocktail laced with fentanyl, cocaine, and xylazine. He was 32 years old. He didn't want to die. He was poisoned. And what followed wasn't just grief, it was something bigger, something heavier, something that broke open every part of me. And as a father, there wasn't a manual for this. There was no roadmap for how to survive the loss of your child, let alone how to carry it when the cause of death is something that society still whispers about and blames the victim for. Grief is often misunderstood. It's not just about sadness. It's not something you cry out once and then move on from. It lives in your bones. It wakes you up at night. It changes the way you breathe, the way you see the world, and the way you relate to everything. And for dads, especially fathers, we're often expected to be the strong ones, to hold it together, to fix things. But what do you do when it can't be fixed? Today, I want to talk about that kind of grief, the kind that comes suddenly, violently, without warning. I want to talk about traumatic grief. And I want to talk about how being a father shaped the way I experienced it, and eventually how I began to find my voice again. I'll also share something that changed everything for me, a grief support group I found on Zoom just weeks after Logan died. It was led by two women, Jamie and Simone, who welcomed me with open arms. Even when I told them Logan died from fentanyl, they were still very welcoming. That space taught me something I didn't expect. It taught me how to lean into my grief instead of hiding from it. This episode is for anyone grieving a sudden traumatic loss, but it's especially for the dads out there because we don't talk about this enough and we need to. So let's begin. Grief is grief, but not all grief is the same. There's something I didn't fully understand until after Logan died. I thought I knew what grief was. I'd lost loved ones before, grandparents, friends, a few people I considered mentors, and even my mother. And each of those losses hurt in its own way, but none of them came close to what I felt when I lost my son. Some grief gives you time. Maybe it's a parent or a spouse who's been in hospice care and you know their time is coming. You begin the process of saying goodbye long before their last breath. The family gathers, prayers are said, hand holding, stories and laughter shared. Also, heartbreaking as it is, there's a sense of preparation, even closure. You're walking toward the inevitable with your eyes open. But when Logan died, there was no warning, no hospital bed, no goodbyes, just a phone call that knocked the breath out of me. Your son is gone. Those words changed everything in an instant. What I experienced wasn't just grief, it was trauma. And here's the thing I didn't know initially. Traumatic grief is different. It's the kind of grief that blindsides you when someone dies suddenly, violently, or under shocking circumstances. Death by overdose, by poisoning, by suicide, by accident. These aren't just emotional losses, they're emotional explosions. They don't just hurt your heart, they change the way your nervous system works. They rewire how you think, how you breathe, and how you respond to the world. I didn't just cry for Logan. I screamed. I shook. I sat on the ground, stunned, not knowing what to do with my body or my breath. That's not just mourning. That's trauma. People dealing with traumatic grief often experience things like flashbacks of the moment they found out, or a constant state of hypervigilance, like you're waiting for the next terrible thing. And there's emotional numbness or outbursts that feel out of character for us. Insomnia, guilt, shame, anxiety, and sometimes even dissociation. And a huge sense of injustice because the loss doesn't feel like it should have happened. For a long time, I didn't even realize I was living in trauma. I thought I was just broken, but I wasn't broken. I was grieving in a way that most people don't understand or don't want to talk about. When a loved one dies from something like fentanyl poisoning, the grief comes wrapped in silence, stigma, and shame. And that makes it even harder to talk about. People avoid the conversation, or worse, they try to explain it away with judgment or assumptions. That's not just painful, it's isolating. I've learned that we need to name this for what it is. If your loved one died from fentanyl or another kind of sudden overdose or poisoning or something you never saw coming, you're not just grieving, you're navigating trauma. And it's okay to say that. In fact, it's important to say that. Because when we don't name the trauma, we risk getting stuck in it. We risk thinking something is wrong with us when really we're having a very human reaction to something unimaginably painful. So if you're listening and this hits home, I see you. I get it. And this episode is for you. There's a quiet kind of grief that fathers carry, one we're not really taught how to express. When Logan died, I wasn't just grieving as a parent, I was grieving as a father. And that's a very particular kind of pain, shaped by expectations that are wired into us from the time we're boys. Fathers are supposed to protect. We're supposed to fix things. We're supposed to be calm in the storm, the steady hand, the rock. But what do you do when the one thing you're supposed to protect your child from is invisible? When it hides in a pill, in a powder, in a needle? What do you do when the danger comes not from the outside, but from inside your child's own struggle? The truth is, I couldn't save Logan, and that's pain I carry every day. When a father loses a child, especially to something like fentanyl poisoning, it hits deep in the core of who we believe we're supposed to be. There's guilt, even if we did everything we knew how to do. There's shame, even if we have nothing to be ashamed of. And there's silence, because this kind of loss makes people uncomfortable. In the early days after Logan's death, I didn't know how to talk about it. I felt like I had to explain it or defend him. I felt like people looked at me differently, like maybe they thought I had failed somehow as a dad. And the thing is, dads don't always have the emotional outlets that moms do. We don't always get the casseroles and the cards. People don't always say, "How are you holding up?" They assume we're okay, that we're handling it, that we're strong. But strength isn't always silence. Sometimes strength is screaming in the car. Sometimes it's crying in the shower. Sometimes it's walking into a grief support group full of strangers and saying, "I lost my son and I don't know how to survive this." I did scream. When I got that phone call, I sat on the ground, completely unable to process what I had just heard. That wasn't weakness. That was the deepest love I've ever known breaking wide open. This segment isn't just about my story, it's about all the fathers out there who are carrying this kind of grief in their chest with nowhere to put it. To be a dad listening right now who hasn't told anyone how much you're hurting, I want you to know You don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to be stoic. You don't have to man up. Grief doesn't care what gender you are, and love doesn't disappear just because your child is gone. Logan made me a dad, and even in death, I'm still his dad. I always will be. The world doesn't give us many spaces to talk about that, but that's part of why I'm here, why I'm recording my podcast series. Because if sharing my story helps one other father feel seen, then Logan's voice is still being heard. And I want to talk about what helped me find my voice again. I didn't think anything could help me in those early days. And I sure as hell didn't think a Zoom call would change my life. It was in June of 2020, just a few weeks after Logan died. I was numb, lost, not sleeping, not eating right, just going through the motions, trying to make sense of the world that no longer made any sense. I reached out to someone I knew, a social worker, and she pointed me in the direction of a grief support group that was forming on Zoom due to the restrictions of COVID at the time. It was open to anyone, and desperate to find an outlet to have conversations about my son, the death, and how I was grieving, I agreed to attend. That was a lifeline right from the beginning. But initially, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I would be welcome. After all, Logan died from fentanyl poisoning. I worried that people might judge him or me, that they'd hear overdose and stop listening after that. But I attended those meetings anyway. And that's when I met Jamie and Simone. They were the facilitators of the group. And from the moment I joined that first Zoom meeting, they welcomed me with open arms. No judgment, no awkward silences, just compassion, empathy, and honesty. They didn't look at me like I was damaged. They didn't even flinch when I said fentanyl. They saw the truth behind the cause of death, a father grieving his child. And that changed everything for me. And Jamie and Simone taught me something I didn't expect to learn: how to lean into my grief. At first, I didn't understand what they meant. Lean into grief? That sounded terrifying. Wasn't I supposed to get away from it, distract myself, tough it out? But no, leaning in meant letting myself feel. It meant sitting in the pain, not drowning in it, but acknowledging it. It meant understanding that grief doesn't need to be fixed, it just needs to be honored. That group became a lifeline. Week after week, I'd listen to other participants share their stories. I cried with them, I nodded through their tears, and found comfort in their words. And little by little, I began to speak too. I began to talk about Logan, not just how he died, but how he lived, what he loved, what made him laugh, and what made me proud. Those meetings gave me space to be a father in mourning, not a project to fix, not a man holding it all in, just a grieving dad trying to keep breathing. I'll never forget that moment I said out loud, I want to tell Logan's story. That sentence might not have come if Jamie and Simone hadn't first made space for me to say anything at all. You don't just find your voice after loss, you have to rebuild it, piece by piece, word by word, with the help of people who refuse to let you stay silent. For me, that started on a Zoom call. And now it continues here on this podcast. In every conversation, every episode, every time I say his name. Logan, my son, my love, my why. And I have a message for other dads. If you're a father listening to this and you've lost a child, whether to overdose, poisoning, suicide, accident, illness, I want you to hear me. You are not alone. I know what it feels like to carry a pain that's too big for words, to try to be strong because that's what everyone expects, to walk into a room and pretend you're okay when inside you're screaming. And if your child dies suddenly, especially from something like fentanyl poisoning or another stigmatized cause, you probably know what it's like to feel erased, judged, misunderstood, silenced. I want you to know your grief is valid. It doesn't matter how they died. They were your child, you loved them, and they're gone. That pain is real, that love is real, and that makes your grief worthy. We don't talk about fathers who grieve enough. Fathers are often overlooked, expected to be the ones holding everyone else up. But who holds us up? Where's the space for us to fall apart? Let me tell you something. I had to learn the hard way. Being strong doesn't mean being silent. It doesn't mean holding it all in. Sometimes strength is telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. Sometimes it's crying in front of your family. Sometimes it's whispering their name into the darkness just so you can hear it again. You're still their dad. Death doesn't take that away. In fact, it makes your love even more sacred because now you carry it for two. You're not less of a man for grieving. You're not weak for needing help. And if the world around you doesn't know how to hold your grief, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means the world needs to change. So, to every father who's lost a child and doesn't know how to speak the pain, I'll say it for you until you're ready. This hurts like hell. And that's okay. That's human. That's love showing itself in the deepest way it can. If you don't know where to begin, start with this. Say their name. Remember a moment. Write them a letter. Or find a group like the one I found with Jamie and Simone, where you don't have to explain anything. You just show up and you're seen. You're not broken. You are grieving. And you are not alone. Grief is the price we pay for love. But traumatic grief, that's the tax we never saw coming. Today, I've talked about the kind of grief that doesn't fit neatly into sympathy cards or well-meaning cliches. We've talked about traumatic loss, the kind that crashes into your life without warning and leaves you gasping for air. We've talked about what it means to grieve as a father when the world expects strength and silence from us, but your soul is screaming. And we've talked about finding your voice again, one fragile word at a time, surrounded by people who simply get it. If you're listening right now and you've lost someone, especially to fentanyl poisoning or overdose, I want you to know something. You are not alone in this pain. You're part of a community of broken-hearted parents, siblings, spouses, friends, all doing the impossible, living after the unthinkable. And know that you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need to pretend you're okay. You just need to show up to your grief, to your healing, to the memory of the person you love. And if you're a father out there who's been holding it all in, I see you. I was. And I want to tell you that letting yourself grieve doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. It makes you brave, and it keeps your child's memory alive. The grief never goes away, but neither does the love. So here's my call to action. Talk about your grief. Say their name. Find support, even if it's just one person who listens without judgment. I found Hope Movement Coalition and that team of warriors. And if you can show up for another grieving parents, sometimes the only light we have is each other. I want to thank Jamie and Simone again for giving me the space to begin healing, for reminding me that leaning into grief isn't falling apart, it's finding your footing in a world that no longer makes sense. And I want to thank Hope Movement Coalition for surrounding me with love, open, unconditional love, because we all lost our children or our family member to overdose or fentanyl poisoning. And it's easier to be around people that just understand the pain you're going through. And finally, to my son, Logan, my heart still beats with your name in every pulse. Your story didn't end with your death. You are still here. You are still teaching me. You are still loved. And I will be your voice for as long as I have one. Until next time, thank you for listening. Be gentle with yourself. And remember, grief shared is grief softened. You are not alone. I am Logan's voice. I am Logan's dad. And I will not be silent.